Ethan had spent most of his adult life saving for peace. Not just quiet or space, but true, uninterrupted freedom. After years of tending the livestock across the state as a large animal vet, he'd finally bought his dream 20 acres of raw land nestled against a ridge where the valley met the woods. He built a modest house with his own hands, laid his own fencing, and finally, after so long, had no one above him, beside him, or breathing down his neck, at least. That's what he believed when he signed the deed. The property ran right along the back of a gated community and HOA development with white fences, manicured lawns, and rules for everything from mailbox height to wind chimes. Ethan had chosen the lot intentionally because it was outside their authority. What he didn't expect was how far they'd go to pretend otherwise. It started with a polite knock. One afternoon, as Ethan was unloading hay bales from the bed of his truck, a woman in a branded vest and oversized sunglasses waved from the other side of his closed gate. She introduced herself as Karen, the HOA vice president from the community over the ridge. She smiled brightly, talking fast, handing him a folder of printed flyers and notices. We're just making sure everyone in the area is aware of our neighborhood guidelines, particularly for property appearances and shared spaces, she said. Ethan raised an eyebrow. I'm not in your HOA. Karen gave a tight smile. Oh, we know. But your land borders ours, and there's been talk of connecting a few community assets. There's plenty of room to share. That phrase landed awkwardly. Ethan declined. Folder thanked her, and assumed that was the end of it. But at WASN single quotes T.2 days later, he noticed tire tracks that hadn't been there before. They ran along the back edge of his pasture, close to the tree line. Then came the Walker's residents from the gated community, casually crossing through his land as if it were a park. Most seemed harmless, waving, smiling, acting as if they had every right. One woman even had the nerve to call out. Karen said, "This trail is open for recreational use. Isn't that why you left it unfenced?" Ethan reinforced the entire back line with fresh posts and wire. He put up signs, clear and direct. But the traffic didn't stop then. One evening near dusk, he spotted Karen again, this time much deeper on his land. She was standing near his barn, photographing the area from multiple angles. Ethan walked up to her, trying to keep his voice level. "What exactly are you doing on my property?" Karen didn't flinch. She lowered her phone slowly and replied, "We're just documenting community-adjacent structures. It's standard during planning phases." Planning phases, Ethan repeated. Karen gave a thin smile. "There's a proposal to turn the ridge into a multi-use space. Your barn and pasture could be great assets. We'll be in touch." She turned and left without waiting for a response. That night, Ethan got a call from Tom, a friendly neighbor he'd met at the feed store who lived inside the HOA zone. Tom's voice was low, cautious. "You need to watch out," he said. "Karen's been pushing this idea that part of your ranch was meant to be communal. She's showing people old maps, claiming your land includes unallocated green space." The next morning, an email appeared in Ethan's inbox. The subject line read, "Shared Access Proposal, Phase 1. Attached were diagrams showing trails cut straight through his property, with plans for public benches and a horse tie-off station near his barn. The message ended with a note. "We hope to begin integration by fall." That same morning, one of his corner posts was gun-snapped clean. Boot prints ran from the broken post to the HOA's rear walking trail. Ethan stood by the shattered marker, fists clenched. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't friendly outreach that they were making a move. Ethan didn't wait long to take action. After standing over the broken corner post that morning, he drove into town and stopped by the county land office. He requested certified copies of his property lines and got fresh printouts of the survey he had done when he bought the ranch. They confirmed what he already knew. Every inch of the land was his. No shared easements, no public access, no ambiguity. Clerk even raised an eyebrow when he saw the concern on Ethan's face. "You've got one of the cleanest parcels in the valley. If someone's telling you otherwise, they're full of it." Ethan folded the papers and slid them into a binder, but something still didn't sit right. This wasn't just misinformed neighbors wandering through. It was coordinated. Someone had gone out there, pulled up his marker, and deliberately replaced it with nothing. That wasn't a mistake, it was a message. That afternoon, he got another message, this one in person. Karen showed up again, this time with two others. A man in a golf shirt holding a clipboard, and a woman who kept snapping photos like she was scouting a location for a magazine shoot. They stood just inside the edge of Ethan's pasture near the fence he had put up only days ago. He could see them from the porch. They weren't trespassing yet, but they were close. Ethan approached them calmly, binder in hand. "Folks, this is private property," he said, "and it's not up for discussion." Karen took a step forward. "We're here on behalf of the HOA's expansion committee. We're reviewing how to best integrate the unused portions of neighboring properties. There's plenty of land here, and the community's equestrian riders need new space." Ethan opened the binder and held up the certified boundary survey. "This is not your land. I'm not part of your HOA. I have no agreement with you, and I don't want one." The man with the clipboard didn't even look up. "There's a provision in our charter," he said, "that allows for shared use of bordering green space for community purposes. This isn't green space, Ethan replied. It's a working ranch, and that charter has no jurisdiction. Here, Karen's smile didn't fade, but her tone grew sharper. You may want to rethink your position. If you make things difficult, the board can file for adverse easement. You leave land open long enough, and legally it becomes shared. That caught Ethan's attention. She was bluffing, but the fact she knew the phrase meant she'd been researching. You step 1 foot past that fence again, Ethan said, and the only integration you'll be dealing with is between you and the sheriff's department. They left without another word. That night, Ethan double-checked his camera footage. He had installed 3 motion-triggered cameras on the property when the walkers first started appearing. He reviewed the files from the last 3 nights, froze on a clip taken just before dawn. There they were, Karen and another figure. They had entered through the rear corner, walked straight to the barn, and taken photographs. One of them even knelt down and scratched at the ground near his main irrigation trench. Ethan paused the video on their faces and saved the clips to a flash drive. The next day, he drove to the sheriff's office. He explained the situation in full, showed the video, and asked what his options were. The deputy listened patiently, then leaned back in his chair. Technically, it's trespassing, but if there's no damage yet, it's going to be treated as a civil matter. Ethan asked what he could do. The deputy handed him a card and said, if they try anything again, you call. But meanwhile, you might want to prepare. Prepare for what? The deputy didn't answer directly. He just said, you're not dealing with a neighbor. You're dealing with people who think paper means power. Best make sure you've got your own. That night, Ethan didn't sleep. He stayed up drafting letters, printing copies of his deed, and marking every inch of his fence line with new, engraved metal posts. If they were going to push further, they wouldn't find him unprepared. Ethan had always believed that paperwork and facts would be enough. That logic could hold the line where fences couldn't. But by the end of the week, that belief began to unravel. 2 days after his visit to the sheriff's office, a letter arrived not from the county, but from the HOA's legal representative. It wasn't a formal summons, just a thick envelope marked request for cooperative boundary clarification. The wording was vague, but suggested that Karen had filed a concern with the HOA board, claiming that the property line between Ethan's land and the community open space was inconsistent with prior surveys. The attached maps had new lines, drawn ones that cut deep into Ethan's land, including the barn, half the pasture, and part of his gravel drive. Ethan stared at the map in disbelief. This wasn't some wild misunderstanding. They were altering boundaries on paper. He made 3 calls that morning, one to his attorney, one to the county survey office, and one to Tom the neighbor, who had warned him earlier. His attorney, a former land rights litigator named Alicia, responded first and asked to meet the following day. Tom showed up that evening. He parked his pickup by the barn and pulled out a manila envelope. Inside were printouts from the HOA community forum digital bulletin board that Karen managed. She had posted updates claiming that new documentation may soon allow equestrian access to Ethan's land and that historic rights-of-way had been discovered. She's planting the idea, Tom said. Most people don't question it. If she keeps repeating it, they just assume it's true. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. They're building a case in public before they have one in court. The next day, Alicia met Ethan at the property and walked the full fence line. She took photos, recorded coordinates, and asked questions about every incident. From the early trespassing to the late-night visits, when Ethan handed her the flash drive with the camera footage, she smiled slightly. This might be what we need, she said. But it's what I found at the recorder's office that really matters. She showed Ethan a printed document, a recent filing for a proposed easement. It had been submitted just 2 weeks prior, and though it hadn't been approved, it was sitting in the review queue. The applicant, the HOA, the justification, unclaimed community corridor, adjacent to undeveloped land. They're trying to claim that your land was never properly recorded and that it defaulted to shared status, Alicia said. But here's the kicker. The map they submitted is altered. Altered how? Ethan asked. The original survey you used, the one from 5 years ago when you bought the place. They submitted a version with 2 property lines removed. My guess Karen's husband runs a small surveying company. Ethan clenched his jaw. She's not just lying. She's forging official maps. Alicia nodded. We'll need to escalate this. I'll file for an immediate property injunction. That'll freeze any changes to land records while this is sorted out. That afternoon, Ethan posted laminated notices around every corner of his ranch. Private property, under legal protection. Surveillance active, no access granted. That evening, a low rumble echoed across the property. Ethan stepped out onto his porch and spotted 2 ATV riders from the HOA trail speeding along the southern edge of his fence. They stopped near the broken post from before, snapped a photo, then rode back without entering, testing the line. Watching for reaction, Ethan didn't chase them off. He just noted the time and saved another video file. He had the footage. He had a lawyer. And now he had proof of something worse than trespassing. This wasn't about land anymore. It was about how far someone would go to convince the world. They already owned it. Ethan knew now that he couldn't wait for the system to catch up. By the time any agency processed filings or lawyers scheduled hearings, Karen could manipulate the narrative to suit her needs. He needed to stay ahead, and that meant thinking the way she did, not recklessly, but preemptively. He spent the next 2 days installing 2 more hidden cameras, one near the South Ridge Trail where the ATVs had appeared, and another tucked into a nesting box on the pole barn roof. Both had night vision and remote access, and both pointed toward key paths where unwanted visitors had been moving. He didn't post signs for these cameras. The other signs, the legal noticers, were for show. That's what's for proof. That Saturday, Tom dropped by again. He looked uneasy. "You may want to come to the next HOA board meeting," he said. "Karen's listed your ranch as a subject under new business." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "She's talking about someone else's property." At her meeting, Tom nodded. "And the way she's framing it, she says, you're the one being difficult. That you're violating an unspoken adjacency agreement. She even said you blocked off a community trail." "There's no trail," Ethan said flatly. "And even if there were, it would be on my land." Tom shrugged. "That's not how she's selling it. She called it a temporary community setback one. The board could vote to override if enough residents agreed." Ethan didn't reply right away. He stared off toward the pasture, where his cattle were slowly moving through the north field. His gut told him this wasn't just about trail access. It was about control. Karen wasn't going to stop with rumors and fake maps. She wanted to make it look like the HOA had always been entitled to the land. She was manufacturing consent. That night, well after midnight, Ethan's phone pinged. Motion detected. He pulled up the live feed from the barn roof camera. A single figure stood near the far fence post on the east side. It wasn't Karen, but someone younger, a tall man with a headlamp. He held something in his hand, digging at the ground near the post. Ethan zoomed in and froze the frame. It was a steel marker stake. The man had pulled out the original and was hammering in a replacement. The time stump rolled to 2:11 a.m. Ethan didn't confront him. He waited, downloaded the footage, and saved it to 3 different drives. By sunrise, he was already on the phone with Alicia. When she saw the video, her voice dropped. "That's boundary tampering. If he isn't licensed, and I bet he's not, it's also impersonating a surveyor that crosses into criminal. Is it enough to get the sheriff involved?" Ethan asked. "Give me 2 hours." By noon, Ethan got the green light. The sheriff was willing to get involved now. The stakes weren't just about ownership, they were about fraud, damage, and unauthorized alterations to a legal boundary. They had a name from the footage to Corin's nephew, who had once worked part-time at her husband's surveying office. It wasn't just a connection. It was a direct line. But Ethan didn't want just a quiet arrest or a behind-the-scenes letter. He wanted it public. So he didn't stop the next intrusion. 2 nights later, the barn camera picked up motion again. 3 figures, flashlights, equipment. One of them was Karen. Ethan sat quietly in his living room, watching them shift markers and take photos. The sheriff had agreed wait until they finished, then call it in. But Ethan had one more idea. He grabbed his phone and dialed Tom. "You wanted me at that HOA board meeting?" Ethan said. "I'll be there." And this time, he wouldn't come. With just words, he'd bring the full truth on video. The HOA board met in a small, overly polished clubhouse that looked more like a model home than a civic space. It sat right at the entrance of the community, a place where the landscaping was always too green, the chairs too straight, and the smiles too rehearsed. Ethan had never set foot inside, but he wasn't nervous. He had what he needed. Tom met him in the parking lot, clearly anxious. "You're sure you want to do this? Karen's going to be running the show in there." Ethan gave a nod and held up the thumb drive. "She can run the show, but I brought the ending." Inside, the room was already half full. HOA board members sat at a long table up front, facing a crowd of residents who were more interested in gossip than governance. Karen sat at the center of the table, dressed in her usual pastel blazer, her expression smooth and unreadable. She was already talking to someone when she saw Ethan walk in. Her eyes locked on his for a split second, and then she looked away. The meeting started, as they always did. Reports, budget updates, minor complaints about mailbox damage and irrigation rules. But then came the item listed under new business. Karen leaned into her mic. "We'll now discuss the status of adjacent land and shared access for equestrian expansion, specifically, the unused area bordering Lot 23. That was Ethan's land," she continued without missing a beat. "After reviewing historical records and conducting an early-stage assessment, the board has identified that certain green space may have been improperly excluded from community use. We have tentative plans to open a dialogue with the landowner." Someone from the audience raised a hand. "Is this the ranch land you were talking about?" Karen smiled. "Yes. The land has remained unfenced in key areas for years, and some survey inconsistencies have raised the possibility that it falls under communal rights-of-way. We're working with local professionals to verify." Ethan stood slowly from the back row. All heads turned. Karen froze. "I'd like to respond to that," he said. The room fell silent. Karen started to object, but the HOA president, an older man with an exhausted expression, motioned for Ethan to step forward. "Let's hear him." Ethan walked to the front, plugged in the thumb drive to the projector they'd been using for budget charts, and clicked through to the first video file. The lights dimmed, the footage was clear. Karen's nephew digging up boundary markers. Then, another clip, Karen herself, walking the fence line after midnight, whispering instructions. Then, the voice recordings. Her saying this will all be green space soon, and laughing about how people just assume fences are in the right place. Gasps rippled across the room. Some people shifted uncomfortably. Others stared at Karen with growing suspicion. I never agreed to anything, Ethan said. My property isn't in your HOA. Your team entered my land repeatedly without permission. Your maps were altered, and your nephew illegally moved survey markers. Karen's voice cracked through the silence. You're misrepresenting everything. This was a misunderstanding, but the damage was done. Board members began whispering to each other. The president leaned into his mic. If what we've just seen is accurate, we'll need to suspend any land discussions immediately and conduct a full investigation. Karen looked around as support drained from the room. Even the clipboard man who'd backed her earlier was now leaning away, distancing himself without saying a word. I'll be pressing charges, Ethan added, turning to leave. This isn't over. And he meant it. Outside the clubhouse, Ethan finally exhaled. Tom caught up with him, eyes wide. You think they'll finally back off? Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked up at the HOA sign as if it might change. Not yet, he said quietly. Karen doesn't quit when she's cornered. She changes tactics. And in his gut, he knew her next move wouldn't be through meetings or boards. It would be personal. Karen didn't show her face for 3 days after the meeting. Not at the HOA clubhouse, not on the trails, and not near the fence line where she had once strolled like she owned it. But Ethan knew better than to believe she had surrendered. People like her didn't disappear. They just rewrote the story in their head and waited for the right moment to start it again. On the fourth morning, Ethan's front gate buzzed. He checked the screen inside. A tow truck idled just outside the property line. Behind it, 2 men stood beside a flatbed trailer, one of them wearing the same golf shirt from Karen's earlier inspection. They weren't smiling. Ethan walked out and kept his voice calm. Can I help you? One of the men stepped forward, clipboard in hand. We're here for vehicle removal. We were told a utility trailer was abandoned on HOA common land. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Who told you that? The man shrugged. Got the call from the HOA office? Said there was a trailer parked beyond the fence near the southern trail. We just follow the instructions. Ethan turned slowly and looked toward the corner pasture where his equipment trailer had been parked for months. It wasn't visible from the road. Someone had called this in intentionally, hoping he wouldn't be there. Probably assumed it'd be gone before he even noticed. He nodded toward the tow truck. That trailer's on private land. My land. And, if you touch it, I'll have the sheriff out here in 15 minutes. The man held up both hands. We're just the middlemen. Then back up and leave, Ethan said. They didn't argue. The tow truck pulled away after a few minutes of radio chatter, disappearing down the road, but the message had been sent. Karen wasn't done. Later that day, Alicia called with news. I spoke with the sheriff, she said. The footage you showed at the meeting lit a fire. They've opened a formal investigation into fraudulent filings and trespassing, and they found something else. Ethan's grip on the phone tightened. What? Your land file at the county office had been accessed multiple times in the past 2 months? Not by HOA lawyers, by someone using a private license number. We traced it. It's Karen's husband's surveying firm. Ethan didn't respond at first. Alicia continued. They pulled and copied your documents, then submitted an altered version under the firm's letterhead. It was denied by the land registry, but that doesn't change what they tried. What happens next? Ethan asked. You'll want to be home tomorrow morning. The following day, just after sunrise, the sheriff's cruiser rolled up the gravel path. A deputy stepped out and approached Ethan with a firm nod. Behind him, another vehicle arrived, a black pickup with official seals and county enforcement plates. A second later, a third vehicle appeared. This one wasn't official. It was Karen. She climbed out of the car already talking. This is harassment. He's using the law to intimidate a private citizen. The sheriff raised a hand. Karen Thompson, he said. You are being served with a cease and desist order for continued trespassing, unlawful land modification, and attempted fraudulent filing of property documents. Karen's face went pale. That's ridiculous, she said. I acted within my rights as a board member. You acted under false authority. The deputy cut in. You targeted private property outside your HOA jurisdiction, and you misrepresented official boundary lines. Ethan watched in silence as Karen stood speechless, her voice failing for the first time in weeks. She wasn't arrested, not yet. The warning was final. Crossed the line again, and next time it would be . As she drove off, Ethan turned to the sheriff. Is that the end of it? The sheriff looked at the dusty road behind her. We'll see. That night, Ethan walked his fence line one more time. No prints, no broken posts, no whispers in the dark. For the first time in months, it felt like the ranch was his again. But he knew the silence didn't always mean peace. Sometimes, it just meant the story was holding its breath. The morning after Karen's departure, the quiet on Ethan's ranch was almost surreal. The tension that had gripped his property for months seemed to lift, if only for a moment. but word traveled fast through the gated community. Rumors swirled among homeowners about the sheriff's visit, Karen's cease and desist order, and the mounting evidence of misdeeds within the HOA leadership. Ethan received a call from Tom, the neighbor, who had been his quiet ally all along. "Calling an emergency HOA meeting," Tom said. "Looks like Karen's losing support fast. The board's worried, and some people want answers." Ethan agreed to attend, though he knew it wouldn't be easy. The last time he'd faced the HOA board, Karen had run the show. Now, the atmosphere promised to be charged with tension, suspicion, and a desperate scramble to regain control. Community Clubhouse was buzzing with residents by early evening. Ethan arrived to find a room split down the middle, half eager to hear the truth, half still loyal to Karen, or afraid of upheaval. At the front, the HOA president sat with a grave expression, flanked by board members who looked like they'd seen better days. Karen was there too, but her usual confident smile was gone. She spoke only to defend herself when pressed, her words heavy with excuses and deflections. Ethan's lawyer, Alicia, accompanied him. As the meeting began, Ethan was invited to speak. He stood, steady and clear. "Thank you for allowing me here. I understand the HOA board's responsibility to the community, but that responsibility doesn't extend beyond your legal authority. Over the past months, there have been repeated attempts to encroach on private property, my ranch. These attempts included unauthorized entry, altered documents, and actions that skirt the law." He projected photos and videos, the same evidence that had shocked the last meeting. The room grew quiet, the weight of the truth settling in. A homeowner spoke up, voice shaking. "I had no idea things had gone this far. We trusted the board to act in our best interests." Another added, "Karen said she was doing what was necessary, but it sounds like she was breaking the rules." The HOA president cleared his throat. "Given the evidence, the board is prepared to take immediate action. We will be suspending Karen from her duties pending a full investigation." Karen's face paled, and murmurs spread through the crowd. Before she could respond, another board member quietly announced his resignation, followed by two others. It was a collapse. The community was demanding change, and Ethan had become the unexpected catalyst. As the meeting ended, Ethan stepped outside, where Tom waited with a relieved smile. "You did good in there," Tom said. They needed someone to stand up. Ethan nodded but wasn't celebrating yet. The fight had cost months of peace and nearly his entire summer, but the next chapter was clear. The HOA needed to rebuild, with boundaries respected and rules followed. That night, as Ethan walked his fence line under a clear sky, he found a small envelope tucked beneath a post. Inside was a note in careful handwriting. "Thank you, from someone who knows the truth." The signature was unfamiliar. The meaning was clear. Karen wasn't acting alone. The note Ethan found under the fence post wasn't the only surprise that week. It turned out that deeper the investigation went, the more tangled the web around Karen became. Emails, altered documents, and even phone records hinted at a network within the HOA that had quietly supported her efforts. It wasn't just a rogue board member. It was a faction willing to bend rules for their own vision of community. But Ethan's stand had changed the course. The HOA quickly implemented a new code of transparency and accountability. The old guard was replaced by homeowners who valued fairness and respected property lines. The community installed clear signage along the boundary of Ethan's ranch. Private property, no trespassing, with official approval and backing from the county. The roads and trails were rerouted to avoid confusion, and a liaison was appointed to coordinate any future discussions directly with Ethan. With respect, Ethan, for his part, kept things simple. The ranch was his sanctuary, and he'd fought hard to keep it that way. He invested in additional fencing, upgraded his surveillance system, and even started posting videos of the land online. The clips of peaceful grazing cattle and white skies became popular among rural life forums, earning him fan mail from fellow ranchers and privacy advocates. One afternoon, a package arrived at his front door. Inside was a handcrafted plaque that read, "Room to share, tow truck ready." It was an inside joke, a nod to the battles waged and the unexpected allies found along the way. There was no signature, just a small card with a drawing of a sheriff's badge and a tow truck. Ethan laughed quietly, hanging the plaque on the new gate. Despite the hard months and the constant pressure, his land was finally quiet again. But as he stood on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the ridge, Ethan knew one thing for sure. Boundaries weren't just about fences or signs. They were about respect, and some lessons had to be learned the hard way, because in the end, the only thing Ethan really shared with Karen and her HOA was a reminder. Every acre of his ranch belonged to him, and anyone who forgot that would find the sheriff and the tow truck waiting.